Cal Ray came down the Deal Lane with the wind at his back and saw that the gate was blocked before he was close enough to know by whom. A wagon stood in the yard with its tailboard down. 3 bundles sat in the bed, each one tied with a different colored string, and behind the wagon stood 3 girls in their church coats on a Tuesday. In the gap of the open gate a woman had put herself, arms loose at her sides. She was not holding the girls back. She was not holding Amos Deal off. She had simply stepped into the only place a wagon could pass through and stopped there like a post somebody had driven and tamped. Deal had the near horse by the cheek strap. "Move, no, sir. They are mine to place." "Then place them together." Cal came the last of the distance at a walk, because a trot would have made it into a different kind of thing before anybody had said a word to him. He stepped down and dropped his rein. The wind took his hat brim, and he pushed it back with his thumb. The oldest girl was studying the ground in front of her shoes. The middle one had hold of the smallest one's coat at the shoulder seam, the way a person holds a thing they have already decided they are not going to put down. Deal gave him the arrangement without being asked for it, the way a man does when he wants a thing to sound finished. Ruth to the Pfaff place for her keep and a pair of shoes at Christmas. Josie to the hotel at Kiowa where they wanted a girl for the linen. Pearl to a family at Limon who had written asking after a small one, $3 a month for each of them, paid over to their father for the loss of their labor. Ellen Deal had been in the ground 9 days. Cal counted the bundles and the strings and did the arithmetic that Deal had already done at a kitchen table somewhere. Then he turned and took a good look at the girls. "You're staying here." Deal's chin came around. "Here is my yard, then my yard. Till the judge sits at Kiowa." His place lay 6 miles north on Bijou Creek, and it was not much to hand a woman and 3 children at 4 in the afternoon with the wind still blowing. A soddy his father had put up and roofed twice. A frame house his mother had made him build when she came out, 4 rooms whitewashed inside, with her plates still in the cupboard and nobody eating off them. A bunkhouse he actually slept in, because the house had got quiet after she died, and quiet was a thing he preferred to meet outdoors. Corrals, a shed. 50 head of cattle running on grass that a wet spring had been kind to. And a blue roan gelding named Smoke that he had bred out of his own mare and made himself, and that 2 men had tried to buy off him at the Hugo sale in 3 separate years. The woman's name was Hannah Reese. She told him that much on the ride, and the rest of it in the yard while the girls carried their bundles in without being told twice. She had come out from Missouri in July, hired by letter, to nurse Ellen Deal through what everybody in the household except Ellen had agreed to call a long weakness. 6 weeks of wages had been agreed at $8 the month. Ellen had died on a Sunday morning with her hand in Hannah's hand and Pearl asleep across the foot of the bed. On the Monday after the burying, Amos Deal had informed Hannah that the position she had been hired into no longer existed, which was true, and that there was consequently nothing owing, which was not. He kept the wages. She set her valise down on the step and did not make anything more of it than that. She had been 3 nights at the hotel at Kiowa on her own money before she went back out to the Deal place, and she had gone back for one reason, which she gave him without being asked. Ellen Deal had said a thing to her on the Friday before she died, holding onto her hand harder than a woman that's sick ought to have been able to hold on to anything. Keep them, the 3 of them. Not a promise Hannah had any means of keeping. She had made it anyway, and then she had walked 6 miles out of town in her good shoes to stand in a gateway, which was the only means of keeping it she could think of. Cal took that in and did not remark on it. He carried her valise up the 2 steps himself and set it inside the door, and then he stood back out of the doorway to let her go in first, because it seemed to him that a person ought to see a house without a man standing in the middle of it. Cal opened the house up and let the wind blow through it while he said his terms out loud in the yard where the girls could hear him say them. The house for the four of them. The bunkhouse for him where he slept anyway. $10 a month for her, paid the first of the month. Wood, flour, beef, and the use of the team. Hannah heard him all the way to the end. I will take the house, and I will take the work. I will not take $1 of your money until a judge has looked at all of us. Why not? Because I know what it looks like on paper. She turned her face out of the wind. A woman living at a bachelor's place and drawing wages off him. I would rather stand in front of that judge owed something than paid something. He thought that over longer than she expected him to. Keep the count then. She got a pocketbook out of her valise that same evening. The small, stiff kind with a pencil and a loop, and she wrote the date and the hours and what she had done in them, and she went on writing it every night after the lamp was lit. He never once asked to see it. He knew it was there the way a man knows a fence line is there in the dark. Supper the first night was salt pork and biscuit and stewed apples, and Hannah did not sit down to it. She served out and then stood at the stove with her plate on the warming shelf, eating standing up, and when Ruth started to get up and offer her the chair, Hannah shook her head once, and that was the end of it. In the morning, Josie set the table. She was 8, brown as a saddle, with her mother's straight brows, and a habit of doing a thing all the way through before she looked up from it. She got the wood box over against the cupboard and stood on it, and took down 4 of the plates, and she set them at the 4 sides, and she put the good one, the one with the blue ring around the rim, at the place nearest the stove. Hannah picked that plate up and put it back in the cupboard and served out to the 3 girls. The next morning it was on the table again. Hannah put it away again. Josie got it out again. This went on for 4 days without either of them saying one word about it, and on the 5th day, Cal came in early because his hand had begun to bother him, and there were 5 plates on the table, and the blue ringed one was still nearest the stove. Josie went on setting out the knives. Us 3, and you, and him. That is 5. Cal took off his hat and hung it on the peg and sat down at the place she had set for him. He did not say anything about the count. He ate his breakfast and went out and was halfway to the corral before he let his face do what it wanted to do, and he did that facing away from the house. The other 2 came at it differently. Ruth was 11 and had been the woman of that house since her mother went to bed in March, and she did not hand any of it over easily. She got up first, and she banked the fire, and she checked what Hannah had done after Hannah had done it, and where it had been done right she said nothing, and anything done away her mother never did it, she named out loud. Hannah let her say so. Twice she changed what she was doing to Ruth's way, in front of Ruth, without any speech about it, and after the second time Ruth quit checking. Pearl was 4, and had no opinions on any of it. She simply attached herself, the way a bird does, and went where the apron went, from stove to door to woodpile and back, and slept in the afternoons on a folded quilt under the table, with her fist shut in the apron hem whenever the apron came in reach. It was Josie who kept score. The hand was the thing that gave her away. He had caught the web of his right thumb on a barb 3 days before, stringing the north wire, and he had washed it at the trough and forgotten it in the way of men who have been cut 100 times. By the 5th morning, the thumb had gone tight and shiny, and the web of it had swelled so the hand would not close, and there was a red line starting up from the wrist toward the inside of the elbow, faint as a pencil mark. Hannah took his wrist in both hands and turned it to the window light and did not exclaim. Sit down at the table. Ruth, the kettle. Josie, the flaxseed and the muslin, and the tin box off the top shelf. She held a needle in the lamp flame until it colored, and let it cool, and wiped it, and she went into the swelling at the low side where it wanted to go, and it went. She did not hurry it, and she did not talk while she did it. When it was clean, she scalded flaxseed meal into a paste as hot as her wrist could stand, spread it on muslin folded double, laid it on, and covered the whole of it with a square of oiled cloth to hold the heat in. Then she took the pencil out of her pocketbook and drew a small, careful line across his forearm at the top end of the red streak. "What is that for?" "So that in the morning we will know whether it climbed." She changed the poultice every 4 hours, through that night and the next, and she made him sleep with the hand up on a rolled coat above his heart, and she came in twice in the dark to feel it. On the second morning the red had drawn back a finger's width below the pencil line, and Ruth, who had been up too, put her hands over her face for a second and then went out to the milk cow like nothing had happened. The hand was no good to him for 8 days. That is a long time on a place with 50 head and winter coming. Hannah harnessed the team herself, badly the first morning and correctly by the third, because she made him stand there one-handed and tell her every buckle in order. She hauled the water. She hauled the posts. Ruth took the milking and got good at it fast. Josie carried and fetched and counted things out loud, the sacks and the eggs and the days on the poultice. Pearl stayed out of the way of the stove and sang to herself under the table. On the 8th day, Cal stood at the corral fence, flexing the hand open and shut, and watching the woman across the yard pitching hay one-handed herself, because she had a bucket in the other. And he understood, with an unpleasant clarity, that he had been watching her for some days now and calling it supervision. The trouble came the way trouble does out there, which is to say from 3 directions in 1 week. Amos Deal filed a petition at Kiowa asking that his 3 daughters be bound out as he had arranged, and that their wages be paid over to him as their surviving parent. He was within his rights to ask. He had buried a wife, and he had a mortgage, and he was not a monster, only a cold man doing sums. And the sums came out the same every time he did them. He drove out to Bijou Creek once at the end of October and would not come inside. He stood in the yard by his wagon wheel with his coat collar up and told Cal that a man's children were a man's children and that no judge in this county was going to hold otherwise, and that Cal could save himself some money by handing them over now instead of in November. The girls watched it from the window. Ruth had her hands on Pearl's shoulders. Josie had the curtain edge in her fist. Cal heard him out to the end of it. Then he walked over and opened the near gate himself, wide, and held it, and stood there holding it until Deal had turned the team around and driven through, and he never raised his voice once the whole time. Then Mrs. Farrow drove out from town on a Thursday with a basket and a proposition and the gentlest manner in the world. She was the preacher's mother-in-law, 60 years old, and she had raised 5 of her own and 2 that were not. She sat at the table and drank her coffee and admired the whitewash, and she said what she had come to say plainly, because she was not a woman who liked to sneak up on anybody. The talk in town was not kind. A woman keeping house at a bachelor's outfit with no relation between them and no marriage and no other grown person on the place would not read well to a judge, whatever the truth of it was. She had come to offer a better arrangement. She would take Ruth and Josie herself into her own house in town where the school was. They would be fed and schooled and treated as her own. Pearl was small enough to still take to the family at Lemon, who were good people and wanted a little one badly. Mrs. Farrow turned her cup around on the oilcloth. "It is not what any of you want. It is only what will stand up." Hannah kept her hands flat on the table. "There are 3 of them. There are 3 of them, and there is 1 of you, and you have no standing in law at all." That was Thursday. The wind came Saturday night. It came off the divide about 11, and it took the shed roof at the seam where his father had never quite trusted the nails, and it took it in one piece and put it in the horse corral 40 yards off. Cal was out the bunkhouse door with a lantern before the noise had finished. The milk cow was in that shed, and so was the hay he had cut in July, and so were 2 calves he could not afford to lose to a wet norther. Hannah came out in a coat over her nightdress with her boots unlaced, and Ruth right behind her. And for the next 3 hours, the 3 of them worked in a wind that took the words out of their mouths. Ruth led the cow and the calves down to the corral and stood with them in the lee of the stack, holding all 3 ropes, 11 years old, not crying. Hannah went up the ladder into the wind, with the rope end in her teeth, because Cal's hand would not close hard enough to hold it, and they both knew it, and neither of them said so. They got the tarpaulin over the hay and weighted it 4 corners with the anvil, the grindstone, a keg of nails, and a rock the 2 of them together could barely walk into place. At 2 a.m. they stood in the kitchen with their hands around cups they were too tired to lift, and Josie came out in her nightgown and looked at the 2 of them, and went back to the cupboard and got down the blue-ringed plate and put it at the end of the table by the stove, even though nobody was going to eat anything. Then she went back to bed. Neither of the adults touched that plate. It sat there through what was left of the night, with the lamp guttering beside it. The judge sat at Kiowa on the 2nd Tuesday of November in the schoolhouse, because the county rented a room above the harness shop, and the stove in that room had quit in September. They came in early. Deal was there in a clean collar. Mrs. Farrow was there with her hands folded. The schoolmaster had put his scholars out for the day and stacked the slates in the rows on the desks, 1 at each place, and the room smelled of chalk dust and wet wool and the pine of the benches. The judge was a heavy, patient man named Orrick, who had been doing this circuit for 11 years and had heard everything twice. He read the petition. He asked Deal his questions, and Deal answered them the way a man answers when he is rehearsed on the ride in. He asked Mrs. Farrow hers, and she answered kindly and honestly and made the best case in the room, because she wanted nothing for herself, and everybody could hear that she did not. Then he called Ruth up and asked her whether she was fed and where she slept and whether anybody had told her what to say. Ruth said that she was fed and that she slept in the north room with her sisters, and that the man slept out in the bunkhouse and always had, and that nobody had told her anything to say, and that she wished to stay with her sisters. She said it steady, and she said it looking at the judge, and her hands were shaking behind her back where he could not see them. Judge Orrick wrote for a while. Then he asked the clerk for foolscap, and the clerk said there was none cut. That was when Josie got up off the bench. She went along the front row of desks and took up 3 slates, 1, 2, 3, and carried them to the table where the judge had his papers spread. She set them down and she picked up the chalk and she printed on the first one, slow, the way a person prints when they have practiced a thing in the margins of other things for weeks. Then the second one. Then the third. Then she turned them around so they faced the judge and pushed them across the table, and Deal could see them from where he sat, and so could Mrs. Farrow. Each one said the same thing. Hannah Reese. The room got very quiet. Judge Orrick put his pen down. That is the name that goes on ours. Josie put the chalk back in the tray. There is 3 of us, and we go where the same one is. I did Pearl's because Pearl cannot print yet. I did Ruth's too, even though Ruth can print. She sets the plates, and she does not eat until we have all got some. You can ask her yourself. She will say yes. Nobody in the room said anything for the space of about 4 breaths. Mrs. Farrow got out her handkerchief and used it and put it away, and when she had done that, she stood up and told the judge she withdrew her offer and that she would say so anywhere in town that anybody wanted to hear it said. Amos Deal did not stand up. He sat where he was, with his hands on his knees and his eyes on the window, and whatever was going on behind his face, he kept it back there. When the judge asked him at last whether he wished to say anything further in support of his petition, he was a while answering, and what he answered was that the hotel at Kiowa had already hired a different girl. Judge Orrick asked a great many more questions after that, because he was a careful man and a slate is not a legal instrument. He asked Hannah what she meant to live on. He asked Cal what he ran and what he owed and who could speak for him. He sent the clerk across the road for Vollmer and asked Vollmer, who had known Cal Ray since he was a boy of 12, and Vollmer said his piece in about 9 words and sat down again. He asked them until the light through the schoolhouse windows had gone yellow. At the end of it, he denied the binding out. He set the guardianship over for 30 days, and he named his conditions, and the conditions were what everybody had known they would be. A fit household of standing. Both names on the petition. And a bond of $300 in cash posted with the court before the 30th day. $300 in eastern Colorado in November, with the beef sold in September and the note at the bank due in the spring. Cal took Smoke to the Hugo sale on Saturday. He wrote him in, and he did not write him out. Half the county saw it, and the half that did not saw the empty stall at his place inside a week and worked it out. He did it on a Saturday morning in front of the loading pens, with the wind blowing grit across everybody's boots. He unsaddled in the alley and rubbed the horse down himself before he let him up, which is a thing you only do carefully when it is the last time you will get to do it, and then he stood at the rail with his own saddle over his arm like any man on foot. Vollmer, who had been after that horse since he was a 4-year-old, paid $260 and thought he had got a bargain and was correct. Cal made up the rest out of the winter money and a saddle he did not need 2 of. He posted the bond on Monday morning. He filed the amended petition with the clerk with 2 names printed on it in the clerk's good hand, his and hers, and while he was standing there, he had the clerk enter his brand over in both names as well, which cost him a fee and a 15-minute wait, and which every man in that office understood the meaning of before the ink was dry. Then he drove home and did not mention any of it. Hannah found out on Sunday, on the church steps at Kiowa, from Vollmer's wife, who assumed she already knew and was only being warm about it. She came out of that conversation and stood at the top of the steps with the bell still going and found Cal down at the bottom holding his hat. "You sold the roan." "I did." "Cal Ray, that horse was 10 years of your work. Bond was $300. He turned the hat around once in his hands. "There is a thing I have got to say, and I want it said out here, where there is people, so you can hear how it is meant. The bond is posted, and the papers are filed, and your name is on them, and that is done whatever you answer me. Your 6 weeks from deal I paid into your hand out of my own pocket on Friday, and I put your wages current from the first day you walked into my kitchen, and that is done too. So you are not owed anything by me, and you do not owe me anything, and you can get on the train at Deer Trail on Tuesday with money in your pocket if you want to, and the girls will still be all right, because I will see to them." The bell stopped. Somewhere behind them the doors were opening. "Now, I would like you to stay. Not for the paper. I have got no pretty way to say the rest of it, so I will say it plain and only the once. I would rather come in that kitchen door of an evening and find you in it than anything else I have thought of wanting in my life." Hannah Reese stood on the church steps in front of about 30 people and did not answer him for a long count. Then she came down the 3 steps and stopped on the bottom one, which put her eye to eye with him, and she took the hat out of his hands so he would quit ruining it. Yes, the shed got its new roof in December out of lumber hauled from Deer Trail, and Cal set the rafters 12 inches on center instead of 16, because he had seen the seam go once and did not intend to see it go again. They were married the week before Christmas by the preacher at Kiowa with Mrs. Farrow in the second row and Judge Orrick, who was passing through, standing at the back with his hat in his hand. The guardianship came through in January, with all 5 names on it. Pearl named the speckled hen Dolly and carried her around under one arm until she was too big to carry. The slate hangs by the kitchen door now, with the household printed on it in Josie's hand, 5 names in a column, and a mark at the bottom where Pearl adds herself again every few weeks in case anybody has forgotten. And every evening before supper, Josie drags the wood box across and climbs up and hands the plates down one at a time, counting out loud up to 5. The blue ringed one goes down last, in the warm place nearest the fire, where it has always gone. Nobody moves it anymore.